What up, Naughty Steppers? It's Connor Whitmore here again with another video for you on the Nawtystep channel. And as you can see, I am joined by the one and only Landon Fleury, aka Landon Remixes. How are you, my man?
I'm doing absolutely phenomenal. Very excited to talk about this album with you. I feel like we've been planning this for quite some time. I think ever since Kayzo first talked about this, it was like, yeah, let's review that Kayzo album together. So
yeah, it's another one of those perfect kind of crossover LPs for our channels, you know. But something I was interested in actually with regards to your channel is that you changed the name of it recently.
Yeah, I wasn't
it says
really
electronic music reviews at the end of it now. So what's that about?
So Landon Remixes from the, I guess from the beginning, the purpose of my channel was to do mashups, which I thought were remixes at the time because I was really, really dumb. When about 9 years ago, I will add, a little over 9 years ago when I started this channel. I feel like my channel has always just been this hub for all kinds of different content and has never really stuck with a specific thing for a long period of time. And recently I was thinking my channel's turning 9 years old. I've been doing reviews since 2015. I've been at this long enough that I feel like I don't want to change the name of my channel per se, but I want it to be more descriptive and accurate of what I do on YouTube, so that people see my channel and actually understand what my main type of content is. So yeah, that's what I did. And I also, I feel like it'll be easier when people are looking up EDM reviews, electronic music reviews, to find my channel. But it still is Landon Remixes. It's just that's a description.
Yeah,
of it.
A little bit at the end. Yeah, you know, we've covered this ground before, but for those of you that don't know, Landon is a electronic music reviewer. He does some more, how would you describe it? Because I don't want to say outright EDM, more outright EDM stuff, because I feel like that's potentially a bit harsh, but lighter stuff than what I do anyway, for sure. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely don't cover as much tear out and straight up heavy stuff as Connor does. I like all kinds of
that Haywire Tear Out album was pretty good.
Oh yeah.
That was magic.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I mean, I would say I just kind of cover a wide range of different types of electronic music. I'll do things in the house vein. I'll do things in the more experimental kind of wonky vein. I'll do dubstep. I'll do more mainstream artists. I'd say a nice smorgasbord of electronic music. There are a lot of different, a pretty wide range of. I'm not as refined as you, I suppose.
Yeah. Your rapid fire review videos, just such a gamut of different styles of electronic music. It's mad. I love watching them because it's just you'll jump from, I don't know, dubstep to future bass, then go off to I don't know, D&B or trap or whatever. It's just it's just really some mad kind of jumping around situation got going there. It's cool.
Yeah, the next one's going to be insane as well because I've got, I don't know, I think I've got around 100 projects since I did my last rapid fire review. So we'll see if I'll actually split that into multiple videos. But
yeah,
if I do, it's going to be
insane. You're going to cover all of them?
It's going to be But usually what I put in my list is what I'm planning on covering in some regard or another. So, we'll see. There'll probably be a few that I'll be I'll axe this. But I try to talk about basically every electronic music artist that I am at least somewhat familiar with in rapid fire reviews. So that's pretty much where I am on that.
I've always said it, but yeah, go and sub to Landon if you haven't already.
Thank
Guy
you.
is one of the electronic music review goats. There is no denying I would not be doing what I am doing without Landon. So yeah,
making me blush.
Go sub to his channel, making him blush. Well, we're just two boys talking about electronic music. We love it. What more is there to be said?
Of course,
just love it. So moving on, we are actually, we're actually doing a review. We're not just having a chat. We are talking about this new Kayzo album, Unleashed.
Yes.
And the last video we did was the Jaws album. One that I wasn't massive on, and I don't remember you being massive.
I don't think either of us were all that massive on it. Similarly with Ghastly, I don't think either of us loved either of those albums.
Exactly. So we're
it's time we stopped talking about bass music artists, or no, sorry, bass house artists, and moved on.
Right, exactly. wanted to move on to pastures new.
Yes.
But you know, there's a little bit of a trend going on here, a little bit of a theme in that. I feel like the albums we've talked about so far haven't really, they haven't enthralled, they haven't enthused, and I'm gonna have to go out on a limb, early doors in this video, in this review, and say that unfortunately that streak is continuing with this album. I wanted a situation where we could wax lyrical about an album together, about how much we loved it, but unfortunately it's not going to be this one. I am struggling with this album. I'll put it in simple terms to start off with. I am struggling to get a lot out of it. At most, I think there are a couple of moments that I enjoy about it, or within it, sorry, in particular songs. But the thing in its entirety, I'm really not feeling it very much at all. When I was preparing for this video, I gave it a couple of listens, and I was like, I actually don't think I can put myself through listening to it again from start to finish. Those are my initial thoughts, but I would love to know what your kind of first kind of summation, if you want to kind of give a little wrapping up of first off the bat, what you think about Kayzo's new LP.
So I mean, there's a lot to it, and I think the main thing to say about Unleashed is I think it is effectively an all-sides improvement of his debut album, because essentially what Kayzo has given us with Unleashed is kind of the same concept as Overload. Are you familiar much with his first album?
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh yes. I reviewed it as well. I think you reviewed it with a synthesizer,
yes.
wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember watching that. But anyway, carry on. I am familiar with it, very much so.
Because what I'd say, and I didn't necessarily like this, when I was going into his first album, I was thinking like, I really enjoy Kayzo for his, bombastic, wild, hardstyle / hardcore type things. The flips that he did, things like that were always like very exciting and interesting. Not necessarily like the best in terms of production or anything like that, but his music was really fun. So when I went into his debut album and it was like this, like him, it seemed like he was effectively trying to launch this like new wave of electronic music, which was bringing like rock bands, let's say punk rock bands who were popular in the 2000s, bringing that sound and combining it with like dubstep, which I don't think he's that great of a producer of. Kind of blending those together, and along with the addition of having Micah Martin on essentially every single track, made me really not too fond of that album. However, on Unleashed, we essentially get the same thing, where instead of him trying to emulate that sound of the 2000s punk rock bands, he actually has them as guests across this entire project. So we get the diversity of having those different voices scattered across this thing instead of just Micah Martin every single track. Of course, I think his production has ever so slightly improved on this album. I don't think that's the main thing that makes me enjoy this project. It's very
slight.
Yeah, I'd say so. I would say it's pretty slight, and on a lot of these songs, especially the ones that feel like they have really solid mix downs, really great production value, are the ones where he's collaborating with another artist. But I think the thing that makes me enjoy this album so much more than Overload is, for one, the diversity of features on this thing, the diversity of the, I guess, sonic kind of directions he's going in, because on the first one it felt like he had kind of completely abandoned his roots in hardstyle and things like that, and this one it seemed like he was less ashamed to go back to that sound on a number of different tracks. yeah, kind of doing that and expanding further beyond that. There's a little bit of mid-tempo. There's a lot of dubstep, I guess, but I really like the fact that he's able to blend some of his, older style, I guess, into this project. And as I guess one thing I'll say, probably the main thing that I really enjoy about this is that this is a project that brings together like all of these different groups. And I know like a lot of these groups are like American, and I'm not sure how popular they are over in the UK. Like, I don't know if people are banging their heads to Under Oath and We Came as Romans over there, but like a lot of these groups are people that I like recognized and people that I sampled and kind of got into. I don't mean sampled in terms of like music, but I mean like artists that I listen to semi-frequently. So there's all these different groups, and Kayzo has brought them all together like on this project. And that's like, I don't know. I think this couldn't have happened without the help of Ultra Records. Because like obviously the first album he wasn't able to do that. He got Devin Oliver on one track and that seemed like a stretch, but then on this album he's got like every band you could possibly think of, maybe other than like A Day to Remember, leave that to Marshmello, but yeah, like I really enjoy the fact that so many different voices, different artists have come together on this project, even if like the production isn't all that fantastic.
Yeah, I think I feel like you could say that again. For me, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that is a slight issue for me in that
Really?
So many of these vocalists just sound way too similar. And maybe, I think along the lines of what you're saying, that's kind of its main selling point, that it has a theme running through it in terms of putting different elements together. But for me, it was just like hearing the same song over and over again. And especially when we're talking about Overload and how he could potentially have developed or progressed from that album, the gripe, like you, that I had with that album was a lot of it sounded too similar. And unfortunately, I feel like it's a bit of a deja vu situation, unfortunately. It's a lot of that kind of angsty teenage kind of vocal vibe, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I feel like all of these vocalists are people that I heard when I was an edgy teenager growing up in London, do you know what I mean? I mean, to a lot of people that will sound harsh, but I just didn't know that this kind of vocalist existed anymore. And so hearing it at first, I was like, yeah, and it happened, beforehand with Overload, of course. But now, the kind of more that I'm getting used to it as a thing, the more Kayzo has done it, I'm left thinking I'd rather he changed it up and made it more diverse than, I suppose, the diversity that you're suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it's the fact that this album is a bit longer than Overload, but it seems like it seems more diverse to me. Like, I don't know how to explain it. In a much shorter time on Overload, Kayzo made it much harder to feel like you could get through that project than this project, at least to me. Like, even though it's longer, I feel like that space is used a little bit better and trying to experiment and try different things a little bit more often than he did on that project, which makes it feel like a pretty big improvement to me. Yeah, I don't know.
Fair enough.
I guess one thing that I wanted to say about this project is that at least since the singles started to roll out, and maybe even on Overload as well, it kind of seems like Kayzo thinks he's this like savior of like putting punk rock and EDM together, even though there's quite a number of artists who I feel like have done it decently. I mean, Dirty Phonics did it with that EP with Sullivan King. Excision did it quite a bit on his last record, and even though I don't think that project was fantastic, I think any number of artists would have had the ability to, let's say, take all these same artists and make the drops sound a little bit better. And that's kind of my main quirk with this project, I guess I'd say.
Sure. So would you say that you're making a distinction there between, like, say, the metal step of a phase 1, for example, and what we're getting here? Because for me, if you mentioning Dirty Phonics is like, I see a lot of similarities with phase 1 in the Dirty Phonics music.
Yeah.
But if you're now aligning Kayzo with that as well, I'm not sure I see that much of a likeness between him and phase 1, just to give that example.
Yeah. I don't necessarily think they're that similar of artists, but I think what I'm trying to get at is, even though they combine their styles in a kind of different way, it seems like Kayzo is kind of pushing that he's, the artist to make this happen, like make this, long awaiting of like metal and EDM, combining them together and making it like actually work. It seems like Kayzo has been really trying to do that, and that he tried to do that successfully with this album, but I wish like they would have gotten a producer, or at least a mixing engineer, who could have made what he brought to the table like actually sound a little more palatable, I suppose.
Right. Right.
That's kind of how I feel, because like I'm just going to use this as an example. We've got LA Never Says Goodbye, which is Kayzo and Arm & Hammer featuring Kyle
Is that
Pavone.
how you pronounce it?
I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Arm and Hammer. I've been looking at that one for months now, just like, you know what, I never want to be in a situation where I have to pronounce that, because I just don't know. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I'll go with what you've said.
I think I saw them live at Paradiso at the Gorge this last summer, and I'm pretty sure they pronounced it Arm and Hammer. It took me a while to figure that one out, because I had no idea, but yeah, it's a weird looking word. But we've got that song with Kyle Pavone. He was also featured on one of the Jaws tracks. He's the now deceased lead singer of We Came as Romans. I think it's honestly, like, I listen to this song, and at least in terms of the vocals, I think it's like such a beautiful song, and it brings back like a lot of nostalgia. And yeah, I really enjoy Kyle's vocals on that song. But then like the drop just sounds like there's a big chunk missing from the mix. Do you get what I'm saying?
I mean, I don't really want to go off on one, because I don't know if it's fair, but yeah, what I've written is these drops are just badly produced, simple as. That's all I've written.
Yeah, I mean, that's
we're
kind
talking
of
about LA Never Says Goodbye, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I could say that for several other drops here. There is stuff I like. We will get onto that in a minute. But yeah, for those drops in particular, I was just like, there was nothing else I could say. I just felt like the only thing I could come up with was that, the way that those drops are produced, and a fair few others on this album, just kind of transcends any sort of idea that you can gauge from it, because it's just throwing itself at you how, I don't know, weakly and shabbily it's put together. Yeah,
I definitely feel that. And like, honestly, like I feel like I've picked on artists before for having like a little too much help, and I feel like I tend to praise artists more who are able to do their own like production, mixing, mastering all the way through from front to back. But this is a case where I feel like Ultra should have put their funds toward having like a dubstep producer with a really good ear go in and mix this thing and make the elements that should stand out. If that makes sense, because like, especially with LA Never Says Goodbye, I feel like there's just such a big chunk missing from the mix, and it's really only filled when Kyle's vocals come back in. And then there's other songs, like, let's say Arc with 1788L, where the mix sounds like fine, like it sounds nice and full and bassy, and all the elements come together, I feel like, in the right way. Or like Dark Skies, some of those songs. But then these, more rock-leaning songs, it feels like there's just something missing, and I wish like Kayzo and Ultra would have put their funds toward making I don't know, making this album sound better, even if it wasn't all of Kayzo's doing, because it's very evident that it is, because of how like bad a lot of these songs sound. But
Right.
it's like I see the potential there, and I want to like it more.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these ideas, it's like you just really wish that he could have, I don't know, made everything that is there just gel together much better, like everything being glued together way more organically with a bit more feeling behind it, because they're just a bit vapid. A lot of it's quite vapid and kind of empty, just bare of anything really giving it that color and flavor to make it something that I'll return to again and again.
I mean,
you touched on sorry, go on.
Kayzo's like not a great dubstep producer, and at this point I'm not really expecting him to be. Of course, there are a couple songs in this album where I'm pleasantly surprised. Like I said, it's normally in the case of like a co-producer coming on and making it sound a little nicer. But I kind of went into this project not really expecting Kayzo to blow me away with any like big fat dubstep drops. And maybe that's why I like it more than I should. But I don't know. I guess I wanted to just throw that out there.
Sure.
Like I don't expect Kayzo to ever make a project that's like on the same tier as like a Barely Alive dubstep track, or like a Virtual Riot, or like, as I've already mentioned, like a Dirty Phonics, like one of those artists who actually make like solid, cohesive, filled out, thought out dubstep drops. I kind of listen to this project and I just take it for what it is, that Kayzo doesn't really know how to do it, but that he's trying to make it work, and with a lot of like really talented people on this project, I feel.
I see what you're saying, but it doesn't sit well with me at all. That kind of understanding of it, simply because of how big a following he has, and I'm like, what are people kind of getting from the music? I don't know. I find it very difficult to move along with it and appreciate it. And he's got such a massive following, and it's got to a point now where I just don't really get it, especially on the back of this album. It's just like the whole idea that you were saying of, we got to appreciate it for what it is and like what he's trying to do, and it just doesn't really sit well with me, because he shouldn't be at that point now in his career. Do you know what I mean? He should be. His second album, this guy is revered by so many people, as I've said, like thousands and thousands of people following him. And I just don't feel like he should be coming out with stuff like this at this point. Like, there's so much of it that I can't believe he finished it and was like, I'm happy with that. Let's leave it at that. Sounds harsh, but it's true. Like, some of it, I just don't get anything from it at all.
I totally get what you're saying, and I'd say I actually agree with most of it as well. But it brings in an interesting point of, like, are you and me like Kayzo's intended audience now? Even though he might have started in, like, bass music and EDM and things like that, is he moving in a direction that's not even really supposed to appeal to us? Because he might be just trying to, pull in those fans of these, like, 2000s and, like, early 2010s rock bands, and trying to expose them to, dubstep and bring them in using those elements. Even if he's not all that good, if he has the ability to be able to bring those people in, then I can kind of appreciate that, I guess. And I'll use as an example. I have a friend who's like very much we used to work together, but he is really into like punk rock music and a lot of the bands who are featured on this project, and he like loves this album, and it kind of blew my mind, because it was just like I listen to some of these songs and it's just like, don't you hear that like the mix is just like so bad, like but it doesn't, that doesn't really matter all that much when let's say your intended audience isn't dubstep fans, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just bringing in that's something.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, it is, and like there will be a lot of people out there who really enjoy it. But you know, if I meet those people, you know, if I'm having a conversation about the album with those people, I'm gonna have to take a deep breath and just accept it and say, you know what, fair enough, fine, you enjoy it. It's just objectively not for me, a lot of it. But I suppose on that note then of potential enjoyment of Unleashed, what would you say are your standouts or tracks that you think you'll be going back to again and again?
Okay, well, I'm going to completely ignore like certain tracks that I don't like in regards to mixing, so I'm going to go purely from what I enjoy from a musical standpoint.
Sure.
I really like Alone, the one with Our Last Night. I like Before the Storm, the one with Bless the Fall. I think Dark Skies is really solid.
Yeah.
LA Never Says Goodbye. That's my favorite
drop on the album.
Yeah, I saw it. I ended up coming across your list.
Oh yeah.
I didn't intend to, but scrolling through the Instagram.
Completely, yeah, fair enough.
But LA Never Says Goodbye, like I said, if I'm ignoring the mix down, I think it's a really beautiful song. I like Arc a lot. I like Anti-Dance, Wasted Space, Fight for Love, and Cruel Love. I'd actually say I like a decent chunk of this album.
Yeah, that's a fair bit of it that you've kind of run through on the positive side there. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, fine then. If you had to, you're in a situation where you can only listen to one of them.
Only one of them. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's going to be a hard one.
And
see if
why, I suppose.
Okay. I might say Before the Storm with Bless the Fall.
Okay.
I really enjoy, like, I think the vocals pair well with the instrumental throughout most of it, and Kayzo does a lot of different things throughout, like, the beat switches and things like that, because, there's the rock elements, and you get those sections with the really hard pounding drums that just get me, like, super energized, and then you get the sections with, like, where it, like, pulls back a little bit with, like, kind of the trappy drums. And then everything just builds up with the final, like, this changes everything, and then the drop isn't like fantastic, but I think it's him kind of doing that mid-tempo, like, kind of resi style, like, better than he did on Overload, so I'm okay with it. I'd say the main thing that I enjoy about this track and a lot of the tracks on this album are not Kayzo's contributions, but rather, like, I don't know. I guess it is Kayzo's contributions, but I prefer the off drops a lot in these songs. And if it's like great off drop sections with like a decent drop, I'm probably gonna like it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that was one of the songs, I have to say, that kind of I've had a fair bit of this recently, actually, because I've been to quite a few shows. And I've recently started wearing earplugs, but I'm questioning whether they've actually been helping me or not. Like whether I'm shoving them too far down my ears. And so basically, with a fair bit of music recently, I've been actually questioning my hearing and whether it's me or the music itself.
Yeah,
and this was one of those songs. So it's like, I feel like there's a massive inequality with like the mastering going on in this track.
Yeah.
We're talking about Before the Storm, right? That's what you.
Yeah,
was that
I'm
what you
pretty
were talking
sure.
About?
Yes,
yeah,
it's the one with Bless the Fall. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like, there's some bits that are really faint, and then other bits that are far too like at the forefront. And I was just like, I wonder if that's me, or if it's the song itself. But
yeah, I wonder that with a lot of songs, especially like certain artists that I seem to not like, and a lot of other people seem to really enjoy. I wonder about that too, because I've been to a lot of shows over the last few years, and is like, am I actually like missing something? Are my ears turning out a certain frequency that's making it sound weird? But I think this is legitimate. Kayzo, like I said, he's not a great bass music producer. I think his strong suit is still, after all this time, I think it's hardstyle.
Yeah, man.
And like, yeah, I think he has the best. His abilities are used best in that, and he knows how to fill out his mixes the best. When it goes into like the more heavy bass music, and dubstep and mid-tempo things like that, I don't think his skills are utilized all that well. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. And I would agree with you about the song too, but I like it.
Yeah,
I know going in with the assumption, like I mentioned before, that like Kayzo isn't going to blow me away with any phenomenal mixing, mastering across this project. I enjoy the song.
That's what you said. It's what you said. Like we know what he's good at by this point. There are songs from him that I absolutely love, like Burner. I couldn't remember the name of it, but I've just got it up on my phone. Burner. From I think it's from 2015, but that was like in my top 10 from that year.
Oh wow.
And it's just like, man, like what are you, come on, like we know what you're good for, you know what you're good for. Like at least hone in on that a bit, in this album. But it is just so dubstep centric, and I feel like he's really trying to go for it, but not, like for me hardly any of it properly comes off.
Yeah, I mean, I like that he at least, unlike Overload, I feel like he's trying to reconnect. I think I already mentioned this, but he's trying to reconnect with his roots. Obviously, we get a straight hardstyle song, Anti-Dance, on this album, and there are a few other moments where he does, the Four on the Floor stuff that brings me back, like Dark Skies, the one that you really like. It seems like he's going back into his roots a little bit more and at least trying to surface that on a project, which I appreciate, because if it was just him trying the dubstep and just doing that over and over again across this album, not trying to space it out with any of those other, stylistic throwbacks, I suppose, I don't think I'd like this project nearly as much.
I was interested as to what you thought of the Yultron collaboration.
Okay.
And there's part of me that doesn't want to go down this route, okay? But I do just want to check that I'm hearing the same thing as someone else.
Okay.
This song for me is an absolute mess. Pretty much from start to finish. To the extent where I don't really get the point of it, I'm not even sure what it's trying to do. And it just left me thinking that, once again, Yultron is along that line of producers, unfortunately also including Kayzo, as I've mentioned already, that I just don't get why their fan base is so huge.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean,
what did you make of it?
I like Of Mice and Men, and I'll defend them. I've enjoyed their music quite a bit, and I'm going to go back to the point that I was saying before. Kayzo isn't a good dubstep producer, and neither is Yultron. Neither of them know how to make, like, at least from my experience, I don't know, I'm not the biggest like Yultron fan, so I haven't like listened to a ton of his stuff, but at least from what I've heard, he doesn't know how to make, either of them really, don't know how to make like a nice, cohesive, heavy, powerful dubstep drop. And unfortunately that comes across on this song, which could have been something. I like the ambition and the fact that it's so crazy and bombastic in the drop. It feels like they're both trying to go in and make something that's just like, whoa, like, oh, crazy sounds and all this stuff, but neither of them know how to execute it properly enough to make it really work. Yeah, this isn't one of the highlights on the album for me, but like, yeah, basically what I said already.
I feel like, you've said a decent amount kind of in favor of this album. I feel like I kind of should give my piece about what I think works with it.
Okay, go for it.
I do appreciate I think you've said this already. I appreciate the ambition of it, and the just kind of the range of different styles he's attempting. And I am just left thinking that it is a shame that, as we've said again already, that he can't, make it feel completely full, rounded, exquisitely produced. I don't really think, for me, aside from those fast-paced drops in Dark Skies, and I mean, you said earlier that the song that I really liked, I don't actually like the song in its entirety. I just like those drops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the only, for me, very solid examples of his sound being fully fleshed out and rounded and full. There are other moments on this thing, but you know, even with Arc, which I mean, you're saying you really enjoy, I find that so skeletal at points, and I think this also actually leads me on to another point that I wanted to make. Unfortunately, I've found myself going down the negative route again, but I feel like I have to, because it's like I want to check that I'm hearing the same thing as someone else again. It's like, it's just so bare, and it is thanks in large part, unfortunately, to the percussion. And I don't know if it's something that that you noticed across the album, but the drops don't quite have their desired effect because of the drums beneath them.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a dubstep ear thing. Drums, and I this is going to be a downfall for me for years to come, because drums are a very important thing in dance music, but in most cases I don't care all that much about drums, as long as what's going on, as long as they hit right and they feel natural in the songs. Like, I'll use this as an example, since I'm about to review the Millennium album. There's a song on that album called Take You Down, and there's a kick in that song that just sounds so like fake, because it's just like really boxy. It's just like kind of like, and it just sounds like you're listening to the same thing rather. Yeah, like it just even though I think that's a beautiful song, that's an example of like a time that like a drum sticks out to me. It's usually when there's not much else going on, but yeah, I don't know. I think the drums are nothing amazing on a lot of this album, but I don't really have a huge problem with it. Like I said, the main thing across this entire album that makes me feel more negative to it is the mix downs, and like the inconsistencies with the mix downs, and like things just sounding like they're missing across this project. But yeah, the drums are not something that bug me more than anything.
Fair enough. Another point that I wanted to raise, actually, just briefly, is whether you think the album's too long, if there are any superfluous, if there's any superfluous stuff here, any superfluous material. Because 15 songs, I mean, let's just, you know, push the 23-song Jaws album to the side for a bit.
Yeah.
But 15 songs for an EDM album is quite stealthy when you think about it. I
mean,
and especially
it's an hour
with so
long.
much of them sounding relatively similar, that was another part of it that meant I found it quite difficult to get through, and I didn't really want to listen to it the whole way through again. But yeah, I wanted to know what your thoughts on that were, and whether you would remove any tracks from it, make it shorter, which ones.
Yeah, it's funny enough, there are a lot of albums that I feel that way about. Even projects that are like somewhat shorter, like sometimes I'll run into a 12-track album and I'm thinking like they could have removed these two and made a much better 10-track album. This is not an album that I was really feeling like that. And I can see how you'd feel that way. Some of these songs I don't care all that much about, particularly I don't care about Our Time's Run Out. I think that one's just like Kayzo trying to do more like rock, but then with like a little bit of like a marshmallow kind of sound with it, and I don't really care about it. But most of these songs, like I mentioned before, this album has enough diversity to the point where like every few songs, even though he's doing like the same kind of sonic sound throughout a majority of this album, every few songs he kind of sticks something you wouldn't really expect in there. Like I'll use going back to Dark Skies again, I didn't expect that drop the first time I went into the song, and it was like I was expecting something very much different, given the first 4 tracks that are on the album. And when we got that kind of like, I don't know, I guess you'd call it like Russian hard bass kind of thing going on.
But have you heard of Alert before?
I listened to a few of his songs previously, before we went to do this session, and I can see it's obviously very.
Now you can see more, right?
Yeah, it's obviously
it's
like
literally,
his.
It's just him. That is his drop, I think.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much. But like I'm saying, even if like it's not primarily Kayzo's doing, and this is going to be a similar thing that I bring up in my Marshmallow review, which hasn't gone up yet, even though it's not necessarily like clearly like Kayzo doing it and the other like collaborators fueling it, at least it spaces out the like the rest of the album, because like sonically we're getting so much of the same, like you already mentioned. It's nice that every few tracks we get something kind of different. And I guess that's the main thing I have to say about it. It doesn't. Sure. It makes me keep getting. It makes me keep my interest in this rather than Overload, which felt like the same song over and over again.
Sure. I suppose a slight addition to that point. Surely he could have spaced out the Mika Martin features and not had them directly after each other.
So funny enough, I think this is done purposefully, and like I'm not going to go out and say that this album has like the most amazing flow of like any album, because obviously like We Are Dust earlier this year, and like that is such like a nice seamless bass music experience. This album is nowhere near that, but I feel like the Micah Martin tracks are meant to be kind of like sister tracks, and maybe I'm wrong about this, maybe he didn't intend it, but like if you listen to the two songs back to back, like without knowing that they're switching, it kind of sounds like they're one song.
It blends into one.
Yeah. And that's kind of, at least that was my experience with it, is like you're hearing Micah Martin and then like it feels like I said, a sister track where they're supposed to kind of be next to each other, even though it is kind of weird to hear the same vocalist back to back. Gave me some bad Overload memories, but I do like how they pair together on this album.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, there was, when I was listening to it earlier today, there was a part of me also thinking that, but then it was more of a, I do kind of wish one was in the first half and one in the latter half, because it's just such a great voice. And that aspect of each of those songs is what elevates them very much so for me, and allows me to enjoy them much more. But I do just wish that I got that, kind of earlier and also later. But, can't have it all, of course. I think final general point that I want to raise here is whether you think Unleashed has an album feel to it. Whether you see it more as an LP with a story of some sort, or whether it's just merely a collection of songs. What do you reckon?
See, I think it meets somewhere kind of in the middle. I don't think this is an album that necessarily tells a story, but I think it flows pretty decently from start to finish. Like it has a clearly defined beginning and an end. Like Kayzo takes us on a number of different loops throughout the album that feel like, like plot twist. Whoa, I already mentioned that a little bit. But it's a cohesive project where he's generally trying to do something similar on most of the tracks on this album. And like I said, for me, it brings back Overload, and it's like after hearing this project, I will probably never listen to that album again, because this album is the exact concept he was trying to do with that, but more like fully realized, I feel like.
Sure.
Yeah, and like, obviously there are some huge like negatives about that, and I'm hoping at this point that Kayzo, whatever his next album is, takes an entirely different direction, because I feel like this is really the farthest he can go down this route. I think, yeah, it's an album. It's a more fully realized version of what he presented to us I don't even remember. Was it 2017 that Overload came out?
It was last year, I think.
It was last year. Okay, interesting.
It was last year because because I reviewed it, and that means it must have been last year.
Yes, that's true. Yep. It was the beginning of last year, though. Very beginning.
Indeed,
right?
yeah. Right. I think it was February, early Feb. I see what you're saying. For me, it does very much strike me more as a collection of songs than anything particularly cohesive. But yeah, it's not one. It's one that I'll kind of go back to for a couple of bangers every now and then, a couple of drops. But the way that I kind of sort my music and the way that I kind of differentiate between what I enjoy and what I don't is that if there's even like a slight moment or like a drop section that I don't enjoy, that makes me want to skip it basically, then I wouldn't put it in a particular playlist, or I wouldn't put it in like a best of video or anything like that, because if I'm skipping it, then that's just not what you want. You don't want to be listening to the music and then be aware of the fact that you're going to have to skip it at some point, and unfortunately that is what I get with majority of the songs here.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see where you're coming from, but like I feel the opposite, because like I on the other hand, I don't think I'll ever come back to this album to listen to a single song. Like, even though the mixing is so inconsistent across this thing, I don't ever see myself not coming and listening to the whole thing in one go, because I think it like legitimately works as an album. And maybe that's because like a lot of my teenage years were spent listening to like the type of music like punk and things like that are infused into this album. And because I listened to so many albums that were so many projects, I should say, that were in the album format in that genre, like this works for me, and I'm pretty decently happy with it, even if there are a lot of things that I don't like about it.
Okay, so yeah, we have been talking for a fair while now about this new Kayzo album, so I think it's time for some concluding thoughts. For me personally, on Unleashed, there are some good moments. I'm talking about tracks like Dark Skies, the Kid collaboration, and ones with pretty prominent vocals in them. But I think it kind of ends there for me. And the fact that they are all collaborations, the ones that I really enjoy, I think unfortunately says quite a lot. There is no one song here that I really enjoy from start to finish, I'm afraid to say. And it also unfortunately leaves me thinking or feeling like bass musicians are throwing the concept of an album into disrepute somewhat. This doesn't, to me, feel like something that has been worked on a lot and that has like a coherency to it, a story, anything like that. It just feels to me like he's made 15 more songs and he's just putting them together. And especially when you consider kind of how quickly this has come after his debut album, it gives me the impression that the album concept isn't being treated really fairly or properly. The title of the album is Unleashed, but I'm not sure here we get a true unleashing of Kayzo's sound when perhaps we should, by this point, so far into his career, as I mentioned earlier, with all of this following and people behind him and whatnot. But yeah, there are only really a couple of moments that I'm really fully enjoying here. No whole songs from start to finish. And if I were Anthony Fantano, then it would be somewhere pretty close to a 2 or a 3, this one. Okay. I'm not sure. Once again, off the back of this album, his sophomore album, I'm getting the appeal of Kayzo, which is really unfortunate because I have absolutely loved some of his stuff in the past, songs that I will cherish forever. Songs, in fact, that really got me into bass music, which is a shame. But I don't see this as a positive furthering of his art, of his musicality, everything associated with his style and approach.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the tea, sister, from me on this album.
Cool.
But yeah, now I'll pass it off to you, Landon. What's your summation of Unleashed? What are your closing thoughts?
So I'd say in general, I'd kind of stick with what I said before, that I don't think this album is necessarily for dubstep fans, for bass music fans, or maybe even for EDM fans. I feel like this is on the front of being an EDM album, this is a very entry-level type of project. It's something that it's not the best, and the production isn't great, the mixing isn't great, the mastering isn't even great on a lot of these songs, but I feel like if a person who is into groups like Our Last Night, who are into We Came as Romans and Of Mice and Men and Under Oath and groups like that, they might come across this project and just be very intrigued at what exactly is going on, because it's, in large part, I'd say it's going to be a sound and a blend that most of the people who hear this project have never really heard before. And I'm kind of trying to see it as much from that standpoint as possible, because I'm one, especially with like tracks on Monster Cat and things like that, if I hear like one thing that's just really off in the mix or something like that, for example, like Champion Sound by Jenton Johns, I'll hear a song like that and just immediately throw it away, like this does not belong here. But when I'm coming from the standpoint of someone who might be taking a listen to Kayzo for the first time and hearing, you know, rock and dubstep kind of meeting each other in a way that like they might never have experienced before, I think this could be a really enjoyable project for them. And like, I like it. I kind of agree with you on the front that I don't really love any of the songs on this album particularly. I think every single song has at least one aspect that could have been improved on. But generally I'd say there isn't really a song that I absolutely despise here either. So I feel either middle of the road or like slightly positive to most of the songs on this project, and I think it's a like decently cohesive album. It doesn't necessarily tell a story, but it sonically works together for the most part. And yeah, I don't know. It's a project that I'm probably not going to remember for years to come as like this insane project that just like seamlessly weaved together like rock and dubstep music. I think somebody else is going to come along very soon and make a better project. In fact, I think Kawhiat's LP does a much better job kind of blending those elements together, and that came out this year. But yeah, I can definitely see myself coming back to it at least a few more times this year, especially if I'm in the mood for some more like edgy rock kind of stuff. I feel like it has its audience, and that's kind of how I get it. I mean, Kayzo is not on the level of a lot of today's dubstep scene as a producer, and I like I said before, I don't really expect him to be. And that's kind of what I take away from this album, is that like, given the expectations that I had, I think he did a better job. And like I said at the very beginning of the video, it's an all sides, I feel like, improvement on Overload. Yeah. That's really what I have to say.
I think I would agree on that front. Mm-hmm. That as a development and as a second go, if you will, mm-hmm. at tackling the album format, it's more ambitious, and I do rate it for that. I like how he's trying out different stuff here, the different influences he's brought in, as we've mentioned already. Mm-hmm. On that front, yeah, I would say that it is an improvement. It is an improvement, and I do enjoy that about it for sure. But I mean, if we were doing this on your channel, then I think you would be giving a score of some sort, and I would love to know what you would give Unleashed.
I might give it like a 6 out of 10.
A 6?
Yeah, like
good.
I said, I feel pretty middle of the road or like slightly positive to most of this stuff on this project.
Mm.
I like its ambition. Like I said, I don't know. I feel like if the mixes were better, if the ideas were more fully realized, if Kayzo was a better producer, or if Ultra would have had like a more, like I already mentioned, experienced dubstep producer come in and like fix this thing, I think this album could have been like an 8, maybe like 8.5 even, because like beside those points, I don't think there's a lot that I really dislike about this album, and that I'd say all those things knock it down maybe like 4 points, or 3-4 points, and then I'm left with what do we have. Yeah, I'm never going to listen to this album if I'm looking for a really solidly mixed or well produced dubstep project that's going to blow my mind or anything like that. But I like the blend. I think he works with it, and yeah, there are a lot of really solid moments here. And yeah, that's basically what I'd say.
Cool. And I think at that point, this video will be more of a podcast, than a review, which is cool. But we have talked about it for a fair while now. But yeah, is there anything else just before we outro this thing that you would like to say about the album? Any other final closing thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, just a couple like small things that I feel like were certain details that I really enjoyed about this album. Arc with 1788L, I really like the chiptune section of that song. It kind of reminds me of like In the End by Linkin Park, and it sounds like super dark and like evil, like it's like the return to Lavender Town or something like that. And I think it's a really cool moment on the project that I enjoy a lot. And then Cruel Love, I wanted to mention how obviously we've got the return of Devin Oliver with a vocal performance that feels much more impassioned than some of the other vocals we've seen him do in EDM, like Follow You. The one he did with Crank Dat I didn't think was all that fantastic. And then we've got Frank Zummo as well, who he's the drummer for Sum 41, which is another punk band. And I kind of wish that in this closing track, some of that empty space in the drop was filled by like more complex drum rhythms and things like that. It didn't feel like he contributed a ton to the track other than kind of just like simple rhythms throughout the thing. So even though I like that song a lot, that's something that I wish could have happened a little bit more. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about on this album.
Sure.
How about you?
Yeah, with that final track, there's a lyric quite near the beginning of it that says, "I don't want to win, I just want this to end." And I'm like, yeah, same, mate. Unfortunately.
Okay.
But yeah, that to me, I do get what you're saying about the more impassioned vocal than the majority of what we get here. I won't go too deep in on what I feel about that, because there's saying what you think, and then there is like potentially affecting someone's enjoyment of it, which I'm really not about. People love to really go off on one sometimes about what they don't enjoy, and I've done that to an extent here. But when it comes to the really fine details of it, I'm not gonna go too hard in on that respect, because it's just like I don't want to be that person who's kind of really ruining it for people on a kind of objective level. It's just how I feel about it, of course. But I've had it in the past where people have really gone ham on something, and it's really affected how I enjoy the track. But yeah, on that note of ending, I think it'd be a good time to wrap this video up. As always, mentioned it at the beginning, but of course going to mention it again. If you are not yet subscribed to Landon, then what are you doing with your life? This man reviews electronic music very well, a large scope, He also has started doing other kinds of videos on his channel recently, more discussion-based stuff, and also he did a Siri video similar to the kind that Mr. Antoine Fantoine does, and it's a very good watch. So definitely check those out. But yeah, Landon, any final little messages you want to say to the watching faithful, the public?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I cover a very different style of music than Connor does, and if you're more into checking out, you know, something, I don't know, some kind of non-dubstep, non-bass music style project that you might not have heard of, that's the kind of stuff I really like to highlight. The types of artists that I feel like go under the radar, that deserve more attention. I try to give a spotlight more to those types of artists, you know, outside bass music. And yeah, if you're interested in that kind of thing, definitely check out my channel. Obviously, thank you to Connor for having me on this episode and for, you know, editing. Thank you in advance for editing this together, because it would be a nightmare for me. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the review and you want to see more stuff from me. Hope you subscribe. I'd love to have you over on my channel. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely do. Yeah, I've once again had a lot of fun talking about this music, and I hope we can find another one soon. Maybe another one before the year is up. I think 2 a year is quite a good little thing we've got going. Yeah,
I think that's good. That's good with me too.
But yeah, thank you, Landon, once again for coming on.
Of course,
it's been a pleasure, and I shall see all of you legends in the next one. Peace out.